Silent Spring, by Rachel Carson. Introduction. Imagine a town. A beautiful town, nestled in the heart of America. It's a place that seems to live in perfect harmony with the world around it. The countryside is a patchwork of prosperous farms, with fields of grain and hillsides covered in orchards. In the spring, white clouds of blossoms drift over the green fields. In the autumn, the oak, maple, and birch trees set the landscape ablaze with color, a fiery spectacle against the steady green of the pines. Foxes bark in the hills, and deer move silently across the fields in the morning mist. The streams run clear and cold, and in their shady pools, trout wait for the patient fishermen. The air is filled with the chorus of birdsong, robins, catbirds, doves, jays, so famous that people travel from great distances just to see and hear them. This was the town as it had always been, from the day the first settlers arrived. Then, a strange blight crept over the area. An evil spell seemed to settle on the community. The chickens fell ill with mysterious maladies. The cattle and sheep sickened and died. A shadow of death hung over everything. Doctors in the town were puzzled by new kinds of sickness appearing among their patients. There were sudden, unexplained deaths, even among children, who would be playing one moment and gone the next. And then, there was a strange stillness. The birds, for example, where had they gone? The mornings that once throbbed with the dawn chorus were now silent. It was a spring without voices. The apple trees came into bloom, but no bees visited the blossoms, so there was no pollination, and there would be no fruit. The roadsides, once so lovely, were lined with browned and withered vegetation, as if swept by fire. The streams were lifeless, all the fish had died. What witchcraft, what enemy action had silenced the rebirth of life in this stricken world? The people had done it themselves. That haunting story is how Rachel Carson begins her masterpiece, Silent Spring. That town, she tells us, doesn't actually exist, but every one of those disasters has happened somewhere in the world. When it was published in 1962, this book was more than just a book. It was an earthquake. It shook the foundations of the chemical industry, it changed the way governments operated, and it launched the modern environmental movement. It's a book that has sold millions of copies and has been credited with saving countless lives, not just of birds and fish, but of human beings too. Its author, Rachel Carson, was not a rabble-rouser or a politician. She was a quiet, meticulous marine biologist, a scientist with the soul of a poet. She loved the natural world with a profound passion, and she wrote about it with a clarity and beauty that captivated millions. But she and her colleagues had become alarmed by the widespread and reckless use of new chemical poisons after World War II. She knew she had to speak out. There would be no peace for me, she wrote to a friend, if I kept silent. The chemical industry spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to discredit her. They called her an ignorant, hysterical woman who wanted to turn the earth over to the insects. But she stood her ground, armed not with opinion, but with years of painstaking research and undeniable facts. Today, we're going to journey through the pages of Silent Spring. And I promise you, by the end of our time together, you will see the world around you in a completely new light. You'll understand the invisible connections that bind all living things together, from the smallest microbe in the soil to the eagle in the sky. And you'll discover the profound and sobering truth of what Carson called our obligation to endure. This isn't just a story about pesticides, it's a story about the intricate beauty of life, the arrogance of human control, and the enduring power of nature to fight back. Book summary. For most of human history, our relationship with the environment was a story of interaction and adaptation. Life was molded by its surroundings, and for the most part, our power to alter the very nature of our world was relatively small. But in the 20th century, that changed. For the first time, one species, man, acquired the significant power to alter the nature of his world. And the most alarming of all of our assaults on the environment, Carson tells us, is the contamination of our air, earth, rivers, and seas with dangerous and lethal materials. She wasn't just talking about industrial waste or smoke from factories. She was pointing to a new and sinister kind of pollution, one that was being deliberately and indiscriminately showered down from the skies: synthetic pesticides. This industry was a child of the Second World War. In the course of developing chemicals for warfare, scientists discovered substances that were lethal to insects. The first and most famous of these was DDT. Almost overnight, DDT was hailed as a miracle weapon, a way to wipe out insect-borne diseases and win the farmers' war against pests. Its discoverer even won a Nobel Prize. Because it was used to dust soldiers and refugees during the war to combat lice, a myth grew that DDT was essentially harmless to humans. But this, Carson reveals, was a dangerous misconception. She explains that the new synthetic pesticides were a world apart from the older, natural insecticides derived from plants and minerals. These new chemicals, the chlorinated hydrocarbons like DDT, dieldrin, and heptachlor, and the organic phosphates like parathion and malathion, had enormous biological power. They weren't just poisons, they were chemicals that could enter the most vital processes of the body and change them in sinister and often deadly ways. They could destroy the enzymes that protect our bodies, block the processes that give us energy, and even initiate the slow, irreversible changes that lead to cancer. Carson argued that the term insecticide was a dangerous euphemism. They should not be called insecticides, she insisted, but biocides killers of life. Because these sprays and dusts are non-selective, they have the power to kill every insect, the good and the bad, to still the song of birds and the leaping of fish in the streams, and to linger on in the soil for years. One of the most insidious qualities of these chemicals is their persistence. Unlike poisons that break down quickly, the chlorinated hydrocarbons remain in the environment for years. Aldrin can be recovered from the soil 4 years after it's applied. Toxaphene remains for at least a decade. Chlordane has been found 12 years after its application. This means that each new application is simply added to what's already there, building up fantastic quantities in the soil. Soils in apple orchards, sprayed year after year, have been found to contain up to 113 pounds of DDT per acre. But the true danger, the secret behind the silent spring, lies in a process we now call biomagnification. Carson was one of the first to explain it to the wider world. These chemicals, because they are soluble in fat, are stored in the bodies of organisms. An intake of just 1 part per million in the diet can result in a storage of 10 to 15 parts per million in the body's fatty tissues. This is where the chain of poisoning begins. Imagine a field of alfalfa dusted with DDT. The alfalfa is made into meal and fed to hens. The DDT shows up in the eggs the hens lay. Or the hay, containing maybe 7 or 8 parts per million, is fed to cows. The DDT then appears in their milk. In butter made from that milk, the concentration can jump to 65 parts per million. Through this process of transfer, what started as a very small amount becomes a heavy concentration. Nowhere was this horrifying process more vividly illustrated than in the story of Clear Lake, California. Clear Lake was a popular spot for anglers, but it was also home to a small, annoying gnat. In 1949, authorities decided to control the gnat using a chemical called DDD, a close relative of DDT. They were careful, applying it in a tiny concentration, just 1 part of chemical for every 70 million parts of water. The gnat control was a success. But the following winter, the western grebes on the lake began to die. More than 100 of them were found dead. The grebes are beautiful swan-like birds that nest on the lake and feed on its abundant fish. After another spraying in 1957, even more grebes died. When scientists analyzed the fatty tissues of the dead birds, they were shocked. The birds were loaded with DDT, at a concentration of 1,600 parts per million. How is this possible? The maximum concentration ever put in the water was a tiny fraction of that. Carson explains it was a house that Jack built sequence. The poison was picked up by the smallest organisms, the plankton, which concentrated it to about 5 parts per million, 25 times the amount in the water. The fish that ate the plankton concentrated it further, to levels between 40 and 300 parts per million. And the carnivorous fish that ate those fish stored the most of all, with one bullhead containing an astounding 2,500 parts per million. The grebes, by eating the fish, had accumulated the poison to lethal levels. The poison had not left the lake, it had simply gone into the fabric of the life the lake supports. Even a year after the last application, all the fish, birds, and frogs examined still contained DDT. The nesting colonies of grebes dwindled from over 1,000 pairs to about 30, and even those seemed to nest in vain, for no young birds were seen on the lake. The story of Clear Lake was a stark and terrifying demonstration of how poisons move through the food chain. And it was happening everywhere. This same deadly cycle was at the heart of the tragedy of the American robin. To millions of people, the first robin of spring is a symbol of hope, a sign that winter's grip is broken. But in community after community across the Midwest and New England, the robins were disappearing. The fate of the robin, Carson reveals, was tragically linked to the American elm tree. A devastating fungus, the Dutch elm disease, was sweeping across the country, and towns were desperately trying to save their majestic elms by spraying them with DDT to kill the bark beetles that spread the fungus. At Michigan State University, 2 ornithologists began to document what happened next. In the spring, migrating robins would return to the campus as usual. But soon, dead and dying birds began to appear. They exhibited the classic symptoms of insecticide poisoning: loss of balance, tremors, convulsions, and death. The sprayed area had become a lethal trap. The scientists suspected the robins were not being poisoned directly, but by eating earthworms. Earthworms are the principal food of robins in the spring. Another scientist, Roy Barker, soon traced the intricate cycle of events. The DDT, sprayed on the elms, coated the leaves. In the autumn, the leaves fell to the ground. Earthworms, feeding on the leaf litter, swallowed the insecticide, accumulating and concentrating it in their bodies. In the spring, the robins returned and feasted on the poisoned worms. As few as 11 earthworms could transfer a lethal dose of DDT to a robin. But death was not the only outcome. The shadow of sterility began to fall over the bird populations. On the Michigan State campus, where there were once an estimated 370 adult robins, only a few dozen remained. In 1954, every nest under observation produced young. By 1958, observers failed to find a single fledgling robin anywhere on the main campus. Scientists found high concentrations of DDT in the reproductive organs of the birds. They documented nests with eggs that were incubated but never hatched. The insecticide, stored in the yolk of the egg, was being passed from the parent to the embryo, a virtual death warrant that extinguished the life of the next generation before it could even begin. The robins were just the most visible victims. Heavy mortality occurred among some 90 species of birds, ground feeders, treetop feeders, and predators alike. The woodcock, the great horned owl, the red-shouldered hawk, and dozens of beloved songbirds were all found among the dead. And then there was the national symbol, the bald eagle. Its populations had dwindled alarmingly. On a stretch of the Florida coast, where a naturalist named Charles Brulé had banded over 1,000 young eagles for years, he witnessed a catastrophic decline. In the early years, he would find 125 active nests a year. By 1957, only 43 were occupied, and 80% of those failed to produce young. The adult eagles were still there. They were laying eggs, but the eggs were not hatching. The circumstantial evidence pointed overwhelmingly to insecticides. The coastal marshes where the eagles fed on fish had been repeatedly sprayed with DDT. Like the grebes and the robins, the eagles were storing the poison in their bodies, and their ability to reproduce was being destroyed. The poison rain wasn't just falling on towns and farmlands, it was falling on the great forests and the rivers that flowed through them. Carson takes us to the Miramichi River in New Brunswick, Canada, one of the finest salmon streams in North America. For thousands of years, the salmon had followed invisible paths from the deep Atlantic back to this river to spawn. But in the 1950s, the Canadian government began a vast spraying program, showering millions of acres of forest with DDT to combat the spruce budworm. In June of 1954, the planes flew over the Miramichi watershed. Soon after, the signs of trouble appeared. Dead and dying fish, including many young salmon, lined the banks of the stream. The aquatic insects that are the food of salmon and trout were completely wiped out. Before the spraying, the stream was rich with life. Now, there was nothing for a young salmon to eat. Canadian scientists had been studying the salmon in this river for years, so they were able to measure the destruction with chilling accuracy. By August, not a single one of the newly hatched salmon remained. A whole year's spawning had been annihilated. The older young salmon fared only slightly better. For every 6 that were in the stream before the spraying, only 1 remained. The contamination, as Carson showed, had seeped into every part of our world. The soil, that thin layer that controls our very existence, was being turned into a sterile and poisoned medium. Here, the poisons could persist for more than a decade, accumulating with each passing year. Arsenic from old sprays continued to be picked up by tobacco plants, leading to a 600% increase in the arsenic content of cigarettes over 2 decades. Carrots were found to absorb insecticides directly from the soil, accumulating even higher concentrations than were present in the soil itself. And then there was the water. The problem of water pollution, Carson explains, is the problem of the pollution of all of mankind's environment. The chemical sprays applied to croplands, gardens, and forests are leached out of the ground by rains and become part of the universal seaward movement of water. These poisons have been found in most major river systems and even in the streams of groundwater flowing unseen through the earth. She tells the extraordinary story of the Rocky Mountain Arsenal near Denver, Colorado. For years, the arsenal had discharged chemical wastes into holding ponds. Farmers several miles away began to report mysterious sickness among their livestock and extensive damage to their crops. It took 7 to 8 years for the poisons to travel through the hidden underground seas of groundwater to contaminate their wells. But the most mysterious discovery was the weed killer 2,4-D in the water, a chemical that had never been manufactured at the arsenal. The chemists concluded it had been formed spontaneously in the open basins, as other chemicals interacted in the presence of air, water, and sunlight. This was a terrifying revelation. In lakes and streams everywhere, what dangerous new substances were being born from the witch's brew of chemicals we were pouring into our waters? With our world so thoroughly contaminated, could man himself escape the effects? Carson turns the final, piercing focus of her lens on the human price. For the first time in history, every human being is now subjected to contact with dangerous chemicals, from the moment of conception until death. They are now stored in the bodies of the vast majority of human beings, regardless of age. They occur in mother's milk and even in the tissues of the unborn child. While a single large dose could cause acute poisoning, Carson was more concerned with the delayed effects of absorbing small amounts of these chemicals over a lifetime. It is human nature, she notes, to shrug off a vague threat of future disaster. But as the wise physician René Dubos said, some of their worst enemies creep on them unobtrusively. Carson explained that there is an ecology of the world within our own bodies, just as there is in the world outside. A change at one point, in one molecule, can reverberate throughout the entire system. The liver, our body's master organ of detoxification, is especially vulnerable. Nearly all the chlorinated hydrocarbons are liver poisons, capable of causing severe damage. A liver damaged by pesticides is less able to protect us from other poisons, and the whole wide range of its vital activities may be thrown into disarray. But the most serious and far-reaching effects happen at an even deeper level, inside the individual cells of our bodies. Here, in tiny structures called mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell, the energy that fuels all of life is produced through a process of cellular oxidation. This process is like a wheel, endlessly turning, with each step directed by a specific enzyme. Many pesticides have the power to jam this wheel, to destroy one of the enzymes or to uncouple the production of energy. When this happens, the cell becomes like a racing engine, generating heat but no usable power. The fires of life begin to go out. The German biochemist Otto Warburg, a Nobel Prize winner, developed a powerful theory on the origin of cancer. He believed that when a cell's respiration is damaged by a carcinogen, it struggles to survive by reverting to a more primitive method of producing energy, fermentation. Over time, through many cell divisions, those cells that can compensate through increased fermentation survive. When they reach the point where they can get enough energy this way, they have become cancer cells, wild and uncontrolled. Measured by this standard, Carson warns, many pesticides are the perfect carcinogens, striking directly at the process of cellular oxidation. The other road to disaster lies in our genetic heritage. Radiation was known to cause mutations, but few realized that many chemicals could do the same. These radiomimetic chemicals, which include many herbicides and insecticides, have the power to damage chromosomes, interfere with normal cell division, and cause the very mutations that can lead to disease in the individual or in future generations. The problem, Carson stressed, is that we are never exposed to just one chemical. We are living in a sea of them, and their interactions are mysterious and unpredictable. We have been playing a terrible game of Russian roulette with the health of our children and grandchildren. So, having risked so much in our efforts to control nature, were we even succeeding? The final irony, Carson reveals, is that we were not. Nature was fighting back. The insects were developing resistance. Through a process of natural selection that would have delighted Darwin, the chemical sprays were killing off the weak insects, leaving only the strong to survive and reproduce. After a few generations, a population of tough, resistant superbugs emerged. Before 1945, only a dozen or so species were known to be resistant. By 1960, the number had soared to 137, and it was climbing fast. Houseflies, lice, and mosquitoes, the very carriers of disease we thought we had conquered, were all developing resistance on a global scale. We were on a chemical treadmill, forced to invent ever more toxic poisons just to stay in the same place. Even worse, our chemical barrage was destroying the very system of checks and balances that nature herself provides. We had forgotten that the most effective control of insects is that applied by nature. The insect predators and parasites, the ladybugs, the lacewings, the praying mantises, the parasitic wasps, are our true allies. Yet our broad-spectrum chemicals killed them indiscriminately along with the pests. With their enemies gone, the pest insects would often surge back in numbers greater than before, a phenomenon entomologists call flareback. Farmers were trading one pest problem for a worse one, as the spraying for the Japanese beetle led to an explosion of the much more destructive corn borer. But we don't have to continue down this road. There is, Carson tells us, another road, the one less traveled by. It is a road of biological solutions, based on understanding and working with nature, not against her. She points to the brilliant successes of true biological control. There was the importation of the Vidalia beetle from Australia in the 1880s, which saved the California citrus industry from the cottony cushion scale at a cost of only $5,000. There was the use of an Argentine moth to destroy millions of acres of prickly pear cactus in Australia. And then there are the new, imaginative approaches. The most spectacular is the male sterilization technique. Scientists, led by Drive Edward Nippling, found they could sterilize male screwworm flies with gamma rays and release them to mate with wild females. Since the females mate only once, this produced only infertile eggs, and the population died out. On the island of Curacao, the screwworm was eradicated in just 7 weeks. This triumph was repeated in Florida, where 3.5 billion sterilized flies were released, wiping out the pest in the southeast. Other methods hold similar promise. Scientists are developing lures and attractants based on the insect's own chemical signals, using them to trap pests or confuse their mating behavior. They are harnessing insect diseases, viruses and bacteria that are deadly to a specific pest but harmless to all other forms of life. Formulations of Bacillus thuringiensis, for example, contain a protein toxin that paralyzes and kills certain moth larvae but is safe for everything else. These alternatives are not pipe dreams. They are real, they are effective, and they are safe. They require a different way of thinking, an approach born not of arrogance, but of humility. The control of nature, Carson concludes, is a phrase conceived in arrogance, born of the Neanderthal age of biology and philosophy, when it was supposed that nature exists for the convenience of man. The other road, the road of biotic controls, offers our only chance to reach a destination that assures the preservation of our Earth. Commentary. It's hard to overstate the impact of Silent Spring. Before this book, the word environment wasn't really a part of our public conversation. People trusted that progress meant harnessing nature, and the chemical industry was seen as a key ally in that project. Rachel Carson, with her quiet strength and irrefutable evidence, changed all of that. She faced down an entire industry and endured vicious personal attacks, but she never wavered. Her work led directly to a nationwide ban on DDT and other persistent pesticides, the passage of the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, and the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. She didn't just write a book, she ignited a global consciousness. What makes her message so powerful, and so timeless, is that it's not just about one chemical or one bird. It's about a fundamental way of seeing the world. She taught us to see the intricate connections, the web of life that we are all a part of. She showed us that an action in one place, spraying a field, dusting a forest, can have consequences that ripple out in time and space in ways we could never predict. The robin dying on the lawn is not an isolated event. It is the final, visible outcome of a long, invisible chain of events that began with a chemical in a factory. Today, more than 60 years after Silent Spring was published, we are still walking down the road she warned us about. DDT is gone, but it has been replaced by thousands of other chemicals, many of which are just as dangerous, if not more so. We face new, monumental challenges: climate change, plastic pollution, biodiversity loss, but the root of the problem is the same one Carson identified: the arrogant belief that we can impose our will on nature without consequence. We still operate under the dangerous delusion that we are separate from nature, that we can poison it without poisoning ourselves. The most powerful lesson in this book, especially for you, as you stand at the beginning of your journey, is not one of despair, but one of empowerment. Carson ends not with a prediction of doom, but with a choice. The other road, she calls it. The road of wisdom, of humility, of working with the natural world instead of against it. So what can you do? First, you can cultivate awareness. Just by listening today, you've taken a huge step. Start to notice the world around you. Pay attention to the birds in your backyard, the insects on the plants, the life in a simple patch of soil. Understand that it's all connected, a complex and beautiful system. When you see a problem, an insect on a plant, a weed in the lawn, pause for a moment before reaching for a chemical solution. Ask yourself, what is the root cause? Is there a better, wiser way? Second, be a conscious consumer. The choices you make every day have power. Supporting local organic farming when you can, avoiding cosmetic pesticides on your own lawn, and questioning the products you buy, these are not small acts. They are votes for the other road. They send a message that you value health, both for yourself and for the planet. And finally, never lose your sense of wonder. That was a phrase Rachel Carson loved. She believed that if we could maintain our childlike wonder at the beauty and complexity of the natural world, we would never want to destroy it. She wrote Silent Spring not out of anger, but out of love. A deep, abiding love for the world and all the life it holds. It was that love that gave her the courage to speak truth to power, and it's that same sense of connection that offers us our best hope for the future. She proved that one voice, armed with knowledge and passion, can truly change the world. And now, it's our turn to choose which road we will take. That was a deep dive into Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. We've explored the main currents of her argument today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. The real magic happens when you travel there yourself. It's in the quiet moments, when a particular story or a simple, elegant phrase connects with you in a way you didn't expect. This podcast is here to help you decide if this book is worth your time and attention. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity or stirred your conscience, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts, it's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see your place in the world. A link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to click that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know we're on the right track, and it ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.